Okay, hi everybody. How are you? I hope you guys had a great Easter and a great couple days for spring break. Um, so you guys are going to be seeing this on Wednesday. I guess we just have one class this week, which is totally fine. But I kind of wanted to just give you kind of an update on how we're going to start to structure the class a little bit more. Since now we have about 5.5 weeks before the AP exam, we're just going to strictly focus on like unit reviews and practicing FRQs. Basically, though, every webinar that I've attended and from College Board and from other places, if you know the content of AP Psych, you're going to do very well on the FRQ. So I don't want anybody to worry about it. We're going to review all of the units again. Just quickly, I'll do just little videos with some review in it, and then we'll do some practice either in AP Classroom or I'll give you kind of like just a mock FRQ. In this slideshow, I am going to just give you some FRQ tips, and I'm going to go over the SOTAs. And then also, I just wanted to quickly show you that I do have in Schoology now, there's an AP, there should be an AP, let me look here. There should be an AP review folder now. Yeah, so there's going to be an exam review folder underneath the online week. And in the exam review folder, I do have two great documents. The AP Psych cram packet is amazing. It's just really like, it's 10 pages, don't worry, but it's like each unit and all of the important terms in it. So that is in here. And then these are my FRQ tips, which we've talked about before. So this is kind of like a little bit of a snapshot of the AP cram packet. And I did it by each little, like, this is the history and approaches unit, the research unit is in here. So all of these, it looks like this, you can print it out. So that's in there. And then my FRQ tips, the chug SOTAs. This is going to be super important to keep in mind for AP, the AP test. Okay, and both of those are in that review folder. And there's lots of this link to previous AP exam questions, FRQ questions. I do an AP Psych review Quizlet. That's in there. It's 400 and some terms. Psychologist, that's a Quizlet in there. So this is now in your Schoology page, this exam review. And if you click in there, there's great documents in there. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go on Unit 1 review. These are going to hopefully be a little shorter than usual. Okay, so the AP Psych exam, I know this is just a quick snapshot of what it's going to look like. It's 45 minutes. It's online at home. You're going to take it on a computer, a tablet, or a smartphone. I think you can even write it and then just take a picture of that and upload it too. So there's going to be two FRQs. One is 55% of the exam. The other is 45% of the exam. One is definitely on research methods. And then the other one is more concepts and how to apply them and all that. So I think that's everything in here. It's our book, units 1 through 11. College Board has kind of compartmentalized and jammed them together. So if you see anything from College Board, you might see something that says units 1 to 7. That is our book, unit 1 to 11. So we're just not going to be tested on clinical psych, abnormal, therapy, or the social psych part. Okay, so that is that. So, and then these are just my free response tips. We've gone over them before, but just keep in mind, remember, there's no introductions or conclusions. You're just answering the question. So whatever the question's asking you, you're not providing a thesis statement. You're not doing any introduction, no fluff. It's just answer the question. And then remember that I didn't create SOTAs, but just in the AP Psych world, we always use this acronym called SOTAs. And that means space your answers out. So if the first FRQ is 7 terms, you should have 7 little paragraphs with a couple spaces in between that. And what's going to be really helpful for you guys during the test when you actually take it is, you know, if you have 7 different little things, if you leave some space in between those, then you can go back and fill in, you know, observational learning and add in what you need to. But if there's no spaces between them, then there's not any room to go back and kind of add little notes in. And it's also handy, remember, another human is reading your answers. So if everything's like jammed in there, and it's just easier to read when there's some space in between those different terms. Order is you want to keep it in order of the prompt. So if you have like, you know, prompt 1 has A and B parts, you want to do A and B and do them in order, because again, you don't want to forget anything. And also another human is reading it, so it's a little easier if you keep it in order. So space out your answers, do it in order of the prompt. Define. Now, a definition alone, we know this won't score on the FRQ, but if you can define, it certainly helps enhance your application of the concept. So I always feel like it's great, you know, to have a definition in there and then apply your term. And you'll hear that from any AP Psych teacher. If you have the definition in there, it definitely is going to help you get that point. But definitions alone, they don't score. But when you apply it and you define it, or you define and then apply, so good. And then apply is the A of the SOTA. You always have to take that term that they're asking you and apply it back to the prompt. Okay, and then synonyms, it's kind of like the last one, and it's always a little confusing, but I think what helps with synonyms is you don't want to just like repeat the prompt, or like you don't want to say observational learning is, you know, observing someone and you learn. Like that's just kind of like saying the same thing. So you want to just kind of use a synonym of that if you need to. Okay. Okay, so those are mine. That also is a document now in that AP review folder. Okay, so these are just, and it's at the end of the review cram packet as well. Okay. So just kind of reviewing Unit 1, and that's the History and Approaches unit. So keep in mind, psychology, you know this, it's the study of science, it's a scientific study of behavior, kind of like what we do, and then mental processes is our inner thoughts, our memories, and our feelings. Okay, so you will always want to know that definition of psychology, especially for an FRQ. And just keep in mind, like earlier thoughts of psychology, it was built on these 2 studies. So philosophy being like our, you know, ever-evolving knowledge, and then the physiology, our anatomy part of it. Those are 2, like how it got to become psychology. Okay. Okay. Let me move on. Okay, so I think I skipped back one. Right. Okay. So, you know, there's these early theoretical approaches. So basically, just giving you the Cliff Notes version of that first unit, there were these like early theoretical approaches. So these 4 thoughts or school of thoughts per se. And then there's these more modern approaches. And that was, remember my hand mnemonic, but then there was a couple others with it. So there's these early theoretical approaches. So 4 of them. I don't know if they'll have much on an FRQ based on that, but just I gave you 1 slide on that. And then there's those 7 approaches, the modern approaches. The big ones are the big 5 on the hand that we did the mnemonic for. So we'll go over those really quick as well. So the earlier theoretical ones, so structuralism, that was Wilhelm Wundt. And remember, he's the father of psychology, don't forget him. And he focused on structuralism, which were these basic elements of the consciousness or thought, so the structure of those thoughts. And his big thing was this introspection, so kind of like looking within, but then that was kind of subjective. So then William James took kind of that whole theory, structuralism, and then kind of made it his own. And he felt like really the focus was like the evolved purpose or the function of the consciousness and thoughts. And then don't forget William James, he was he did the first psychology book. And then there was Gestalt, that was the emphasis of the whole consciousness or the whole thoughts being greater than the sum of its parts. And then psychoanalytic, which then became psychodynamic. That was Sigmund Freud, and he was all about the unconscious forces that influence the behavior. Okay, so just a kind of a recap on those earlier thoughts on the theories and approaches of psychology. And then we went more into, sorry, I normally, sorry, I'm like having a little tech issue. I started to do a Prezi on this, and then I was like, this is so much because the Prezis are a little harder to do. So I'm doing Google Slides. So sorry, this looks a little different. Okay, so those were the 4 earlier approaches, and then they kind of morphed into these modern approaches. So there's psychodynamic or psychoanalytic. Know that those are kind of like interchangeable. Then there's behavioral, humanistic, cognitive, biological, evolutionary, and then sociocultural. So the first 5 are going to be, again, the hand mnemonic that I gave you. And then I just threw in here a little FRQ tip that if you were ever asked about like a theory in the FRQ, you could always kind of structure it like this, like the behavioralism approach explains, use this psychology definition in here, explains that human behaviors and mental processes are the result of, and then you would define like behaviorism or behavioral theory, okay? All right, let's start with psychoanalytic or psychodynamic approach. And remember, if we're looking at the hand, it's our thumb because it's things in the past. So behaviors and mental processes are the result of unconscious motivations and conflicts. Behaviors are impacted by the personality. Remember that whole id, ego, superego. We learned that in the personality unit, but that ego is always trying to mediate between, you know, the superego and the id. Okay. And in this theory, it was really the emphasis on the unconscious mind being the director of all behavior. So like there was this like suppressed memory, and that's, you know, what's causing all these behavior issues. Key people with this is Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, and Erik Erikson. Okay, so again, thumb, unconscious, buzzwords, unconscious. Okay, behaviorism approach. This one, if we're looking at the fingers, the middle finger, remember? And this one explains behavior. It's behavior shaped, it shaped the learning processes because of like associations of things and that classical conditioning. Remember with Watson, the little Albert, he associated, you know, this big bang with, you know, being afraid of like white furry objects. So in this approach, all behaviors are learned as a result of operant consequences such as reinforcements and punishments. Behaviors are learned by watching and imitating others in observational or social learning. Remember that with Bandura's Bobo doll experiment. And the key people in this one were Ivan Pavlov, John Watson, who was the little Albert experiment guy, B.F. Skinner. Remember we watched videos on him, how he trained those pigeons to, you know, play ping pong. And then Albert Bandura was that social learning theory. He was the Bobo doll experiment guy. Okay, so that's all behaviorism. So the middle finger in our little mnemonic on our hand. Okay, humanistic approach. This is the ring finger. The emphasis is on this, like, you know, human growth and potential, as well as our self-concept. So anytime you hear anything with like human growth, potential, self-concept, you know, they felt in this approach that humans are naturally good and trying to reach their full potential through free will. And it definitely varied from behaviorism, where they just felt like it was just, you know, learned behavior. This was just that we're all good and we're just all trying to like move up in the hierarchy towards self-actualization. And the other thing with this one, this approach, was that individuals need this acceptance and this genuineness and this empathy to become the best versions of themselves. Okay, key people here were Maslow with the hierarchy of needs, and then Carl Rogers, who was the whole like unconditional positive regard guy. Okay, then there's cognitive approach. Remember, this is our thinking. the pointer finger. So this theory, it just explains that behaviors and mental processes are influenced by our thoughts, our attitudes, our memories, our expectations. And anytime you think cognitive, think thinking. Like that's a big buzzword in cognition. It's all about the thinking, how we take it in, how we store, how we retrieve information, and then how our perceptions then influence our actions. Okay. Key people here is Jean Piaget, that he was that big guy with the cognitive developmental theory. Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck. We didn't really learn too much about them. They were big hitters in the therapy unit. The biological approach, this theory explains all of our behaviors and mental processes are influenced by differences and changes in our brain and our nervous system function. So according to this approach, this, remember, was our pinky finger, pinky in the brain. They want to know the anatomy of the brain and how it impacts behavior. So especially with like neurotransmitters, if you're low in dopamine, what would you have? You know, if you're low in serotonin, you might have depression. If you're higher in certain neurotransmitters, you're going to have certain disorders. Okay, so the neurotransmitter, those brain chemicals, hormones, nervous system activity, and genes inherited from one's parents. This is all, those would all be buzzwords in the biological approach. Okay, key people in this one are Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga. They were both in that, the split brain theory. Okay. Evolutionary approach, this one is, you know, how natural selection process cause behavior to evolve over time. And then this theory explains that our behaviors and mental processes are present in humans because they were naturally selected for creating a reproductive or survival advantage for species. So natural selection here would be a big buzzword. In Darwin, he was that one. And then the last one of those 7 modern approaches, their sociocultural approach. This theory explains that behaviors and mental processes are influenced by like ethnicity, religion, gender, language, nationality, economic status. But it's basically just your learned norms are associated by these groups. So it could even be like what neighborhood you lived in, friend groups. I'm watching All American right now, don't judge me. But you know, those learned norms at the Beverly High School versus the other high school, those would be a sociocultural approach. Like, you know, there's different norms in different neighborhoods, and you learn those based on, you know, these learned norms. And again, behaviors are influenced by norms, and sometimes they're individualistic versus collective cultures. Key people here, Philip Zimbardo, Stanley Milgram, and Solomon Asch. We didn't learn as much about him because he was more in the social psych unit, but Philip Zimbardo, he did that Stanford prison experiment. Stanley Milgram did the shock experiment. So those were, you know, just like learned norms, like we listened to people in charge. Like, why didn't those people stop that experiment? We learned that we should listen to people in white coats, and it's crazy. Okay, so that's sociocultural approach. And I think that is the end. Okay, so that's a little snippet of little like Cliff Notes version of the whole Unit 1. I hope that was helpful. Keep in mind that, you know, it's psychodynamic, psychoanalytic is the unconscious, cognitive is thinking, middle finger is behavioral, humanistic, everybody loves each other, we're in that unconditional positive regard. Biology is the pinky and the brain, so they're more, and then there's the evolutionary, which is natural selection, and then sociocultural, which is learned norms. So those are kind of like the buzzwords for that. Okay, there's just going to be a short little like assignment in Schoology after this. So that'll take care of this week. Next week, we will go really hit hard in the research unit, because that's like one whole FRQ. And I'm sure there's going to be a graph on there. So we'll hit that next week. Okay. Email me if you have any questions, and I hope you guys are all doing well. Okay. Take care.